Hello there, I'm John Tenner. I'm Editor-in-Chief for Telecom Asia. We're on the sidelines for LTE Asia here in Singapore. And joining me right now is Andy Huckridge. He's the Director of Service Provider Solutions at Gigamon. Andy, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, John.
Now, LTE operators have a lot on their plates in terms of new technologies they have to deal with, like voice over LTE and network virtualization. What are some of the biggest concerns they have in that regard?
Sure, there's quite a lot on their plates with regards to new technologies and specifically de-risking those technologies at the moment. What we see from the monitoring perspective and trying to help out operators as much as we can is some of the interactions when deploying these new technologies. For example, does an operator deploy LTE or voice over LTE first, or do they virtualize their core? Do they upgrade the pipes, the transport pipes that they have in order to take into account QoS, or do they just wait until they refarm the 2G data so that's what drives the increases of data? So we see that operators have a lot of decisions to make, and primarily from our perspective, it's all about how to de-risk these new technologies. Do they deploy all of these technologies at the same time, or do they try to do it one after the other?
What impact does that have on their network architectures and their monitoring capabilities?
Sure. So what we're seeing is that it depends on where the operator starts. Maybe the operator is upgrading their core network first. Maybe the operator is looking at virtualizing parts of their network first, whether it's the transport or some of the network elements. A lot of these new technologies don't have monitoring built into them. I mean, it's coming. But it's very, very hard for the operator to be able to directly connect a tool to a 100 gig pipe, to look inside a virtual network container, things like this. So what we're trying to do is to try to educate and trying to help as much as we can to say, hey, it's a lot easier if you can see where the problems are. It's a lot easier to try to find the correct needle in the correct haystack, as opposed to spending a lot of time finding the wrong needle in the wrong haystack.
So overall, how can mobile operators get better visibility on their networks?
Sure. So we're working on a program at the moment called the Triple Challenge of Network Transformation, which looks into IP voice, voice over LTE, voice over IMS, voice over Wi-Fi, which a lot of operators are rolling out, and a lot of these big pipes, as well as the different network virtualization technologies. And what we're saying is that if it's at all possible, the best way to go about doing this is to be able to deploy a unified tool rail, so you can see all of these technologies and how they interact with each other. For example, you can see how the different types of RTP play nicely or don't play nicely with other different types of traffic on the same pipe. We can see then what happens if a virtual network function spools up or is deprovisioned, and how that affects other traffic on the same pipe, and how these technologies interact with other technologies. So what we're saying is that it's a little bit of a brave new world, and what we're trying to do is to help to de-risk the rollout of these next generation technologies, which oftentimes don't have monitoring built in.
Okay, so does the visibility fabric involve a major upgrade for operators, or is it a relatively easy migration?
Sure. So you mentioned the visibility fabric there, and that's one of the things that Gigamon does, is to be able to help our carrier customers to gain visibility at the fabric level across the entire network, across the entire architecture. So what that involves is a number of tapping points, aggregation points, and then smart features that allow the tools, the analytic tools that are connected across the network, either to be centralized and to be able to see only the traffic they need to see, thus making the throughput processing capability of those tools a lot faster, a lot more meaningful. So what the operators can then do, as I already mentioned, is they can find those problems much faster, keep the network up, reduce downtime, reduce churn, the cost of customer support calls and things like that, but also allowing them to deploy these new technologies in parallel, de-risking the deployment of these new technologies.
How steep a learning curve is that for network engineers?
Sure, it's another good question and a very important one, obviously. So essentially, the visibility fabric sits at a completely different level, different layer. So we copy traffic and we put it onto a separate monitoring network. So it doesn't interfere at all with the existing traffic that's on the network. It doesn't interfere at all with the existing network architecture. So in terms of deploying it, it's reasonably simple from that perspective. And then all of the usual network lessons, all of the usual network education that you would expect a network engineer to have would come into play again with this parallel monitoring network. to be able to find these problems faster, to de-risk the new technologies. So it's pretty straightforward, really.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we're out of time, so we'll have to leave it there. So, Andy Huckridge of Gigamon, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, John. Pleasure.